But look, I'll be honest, what offends me most about this energy crisis as a skeptic is that there's just no gain for all this pain. We're spending tens and tens of billions of dollars here going green, and the difference that would actually make to the world's climate is virtually nothing. It's not just me saying it. That was the assessment also of Australia's own Chief Scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel, when he gave evidence to Parliament, the former Chief Scientist. And is the warming we've seen actually good or bad? See, this is what I'm thinking. But let's talk to an expert in energy who is not a skeptic like me, has backed us switching to wind and solar, and let's see if he's happy with how it's going. I'm joined by Tony Wood, Director of the Energy Program of the Grattan Institute. Tony, it's great to see you. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Despite talking to a skeptic, I appreciate this dialogue. The Albanese government has a target. Get to 82% renewable energy, like wind and solar, backed by batteries, things of Snowy 2.0, by 2030. That's just 7 years from now. Will it make that?
Not the way we're going. It won't. I think we'll be lucky to make 70%. We're about 35% now, Andrew, renewables. That's come up a long way from what it used to be, of course. But 82% looks a long way off now. Is it technically achievable? Maybe, but we'd have to get our skates on really quickly, because we haven't been building what's necessary to meet that sort of target. Not just the renewables, by the way, but also the storage and other things you need to back up a high renewable system, which has very different characteristics from coal and gas-fired power stations.
Of course, I agree with you. I mean, you could do a lot more when money's no object. That's the issue for me. You can do much more, but you're going to then pay an absolute fortune, even if it is technically possible. Now, we've got coal generators that are now planned to close even earlier than planned, right? And that's in part because someone like Mike Cannon-Brookes, who's a global warming activist, is on the, got a big shareholder of AGL, is demanding this. But replacing that stuff is way behind. As you've written, we've got years of delay to Snowy 2.0, which is kind of battery. We've got delays to renewable energy zones. I would add, we've got farmers fighting transmission lines, residents fighting wind farms, big cost blowouts. So all the big transmission lines we need, like the Marinas link to get wind power from Tasmania to Victoria. Given all that, how can you see that being turned around?
Well, I guess the first thing is that a lot of these problems that we've run into and challenges that maybe should have been foreseen and weren't, aren't just the cost. They are also the difficulties of negotiating access to land. A lot of people, not surprisingly, aren't very keen on transmission lines going through their communities. They're not the most attractive things I've ever seen. So that's one problem. And the other problem is planning approvals. I mean, you've got 3 levels of approvals. This is not just unique to these renewable energy projects, Andrew. It's sort of like, I know one developer who was trying to build a wind farm. He had all of his federal approvals. He had all of his state approvals. He couldn't get approval for the last couple of 100 metres of road to connect his plant to the roadworks. Now, that's the sort of thing that's holding all this up. And as a consequence, we're nowhere near the target we need to achieve, both for renewable energy, the storage you mentioned with Snowy Hydro, which is a very significant debacle, and the other storage and transmission that we need. Now, can it be done? Yes. My view would be that it won't cost us much more than where we are now. The coal-fired power stations are getting old, and we either have to replace them with something different or replace them with the same. The plan is to replace them with something different. And I would agree with you again, by the way, that gas almost certainly has to play a role in this. I mean, we can close down the coal-fired power stations and have a lot more renewables, but in my view, for at least a while yet, we'll need gas to fill in when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing.
Tony, don't keep agreeing with me, because you'll never eat lunch in Melbourne again if you do keep doing that. But as you say, you can do it if you... For instance, if you ram through changes to planning to allow these transmission wires to be built much faster, you would set off the bush. You would set bush protests alight. You can't do that really politically. And meanwhile, of course, power bills are already rising and rising and rising, even though we've been told for years since the Garner report, this will save you money. It's much cheaper than, the effects of global warming. In fact, the Albanese government promised last year it would cut our power bills by $275 a year by 2025. That's not going to happen, is it?
Well, one thing I would disagree with you on, if you want one, is that the power increases we've seen from this July, and a lot of Australians are paying an extra 25 to 30% increase in their electricity from 1 July this year. Most of that is the cost we're now having to recover from the problems we had in the middle of last year, almost all of which was caused by either the unavailability of the coal-fired power stations and things like flooding of coal mines, that sort of thing, and also the very high cost of gas. So as a result of that, that's what's driving the cost increases we've seen now. And at the same time, if we don't build these renewables, we won't see the benefit of renewables. I mean, I'm not suggesting, by the way, that renewables, a system of renewables, will be far less costly than the system we have now. The renewables themselves are much cheaper. By the time you add up the transmission you were just talking about, and things like battery pump storage and pumped hydro storage, if we ever get that working properly, then I think we're probably going to be about where we are now. Not much worse, and certainly not much better. However, we will be on a journey to reduce emissions, and that's where I may very well disagree with you, because I accept the science that climate change has to be dealt with, and that means we, Australia, have to be part of that. And of course, we do have bipartisan support for the overall objective, which is net zero by 2050.
Bipartisan support for something that makes no sense, because I don't think all this pain will not get us a gain commensurate with that, the rising power bills, et cetera. I think that's my view. And I just think, Tony, if you really want zero emissions and you want to go easy, you don't want power lines all over go nuclear. I don't know why we don't do that, but that's a debate for another day. Thank you so much for your time, Tony. Tony Wood, thank you so much.